This is Quoting Life, where we let the stories of the past shape your future. On this week's episode, we had the pleasure of interviewing Andrej Grman. Andrej is a seasoned traveler and traveled to so many different countries. But perhaps the most important thing we learned from Andrej was his ability to take risk. Andrej breaks down a 3-step process to taking more risks in your life right away. I can't wait to let you hear this episode. But there's one last thing I need to ask you. It would mean the world if you could just pause this video for a second and hit that subscribe button or follow button if you're on Spotify. In exchange, I promise to bring you the best possible stories to help shape your lives. This is just the beginning for Quoting Life, and we have so much more planned. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of the conversation. Andrej, I've looked at your profile. Very inspiring, World Economic Forum, so many different things that you've done. And you strike as the typical student that when I looked at their LinkedIn profile, wow, they're a high achiever. And the interesting thing is, in our school, we went to the same school. There's so many of those, and people always question, how did they get to the point that they are today? And so I think the best place to start is your childhood. And so I'm really curious, Andrej, what was it like growing up? I know you're Slovakian. Did you grow up in Slovakia or grow up in Vancouver?
Yes, right. So I grew up in Slovakia, spent the first 20 years of my life there actually before I moved to Vancouver to study at UBC. So the majority of my life, and certainly that experience in there really shaped who I am today and how I look at the world. But, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to then move to Canada and travel around to shape that perspective. And so, my childhood was really good. I received a lot of love and support from my family. And I was lucky to have a community around myself of people who were really passionate and curious about exploring the world outside. So as a child, I would spend most of the day outside. My parents didn't even know where I would be. And, we would be mostly playing games in the forest or playing a lot of sports in the neighborhood, which is, I think, something that has really shaped me as a team player and just generally a person who likes to do things and likes to work with people. Because most of my childhood days were spent in that way. And so I think, Slovakia as a country that has been on its own for only 30 years after the fall of communism has been going through a lot of changes and development in the time when I was growing up, and seeing that now also from the outsider perspective when I'm living abroad has been also quite influential.
That's interesting. Instantly, I thought back to something I listened to this week. It was a podcast with Walter Isaacson, who's the biographer for both Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. And he was saying how Elon's kid, X, Elon went to, I don't know, it was his factory or something, and he would just bring X along, and X would be touching all the equipment and the tools and playing around with it. And the biographer went, well, that's kind of unsafe. You should probably grab your kid and, put it in a safe zone. And then Elon said, no, I want to encourage my kid to take risks and to learn on its own. And when you say that, like, your parents kind of allowed you to explore, go in the forest and things like that, do you echo that? Did you have an environment growing up where you were encouraged to take risks?
I think there was a balance that my parents, obviously with their responsibility, were striving for. But I think it was less about taking risks, but it was more about the trust that we've built. And what I mean by that is I, for example, never had a curfew, but I never misused that and never came home too late, and always tried to come at reasonable time. And so I think with that, what this sense of trust that we built allowed our relationship to translate into was me having that space to as a kid to really explore and take those risks, but also recognizing my parents' concern and care, which made me really cautious about the risks I was taking.
So generally, I guess that when someone doesn't have a curfew set, when parents aren't always watching their kids, children in Canada and I guess like these nations would take advantage of their freedom and flexibility and maybe like come home late or like do things that they know their parents won't approve of, but they do it secretly without letting them know. So why do you think it's so different for you?
I think it's something that's definitely tied to the approach of my parents themselves. And there were kids in the neighborhood who had a curfew, but I think having that opportunity to have that space also helped me to become independent quite early on. And then at the age of 15 or 16, at the beginning of the high school, I moved away to a boarding school away from the family. And I think also that space that my parents gave me as a child was definitely helpful in being ready at that age to do that step. And then eventually moving abroad a few years ago. But I'm curious, you mentioned about the kids growing up in Canada and if not having that space, doing it more secretly. Do you have some personal experiences on examples on, how your childhood was in terms of not only curfew, but generally the level of freedom and I guess the intervention from your parent?
Yeah, I wonder, because you grew up in a Asian household, so was it the typical stereotype where it was super strict, or?
I wouldn't say it was super strict for me. I did have a lot of time to play around with other kids when I was growing up. I remember in elementary school, normally I'd stay late. My mom would like be supervising in the background, and I would just be playing on the playground with the friends I made at school. And gradually, as I grew up, I was signed up for, I guess, quite a few extracurriculars. I did Taekwondo for a very long time. I did piano, did swimming, I did cadet. So my days were generally filled. And through those experiences, through like the people I met, it really shaped the person I am. And I assume that like when you go through these extracurriculars, these people that you meet are generally people who have more self-control, I'd say, and don't really sneak out of the house. And guess it's really the environment that I've brought up in that really molded me into the person I am.
Yeah, so it's kind of making me think, because I remember a thought I had recently is, I remember growing up, if there was a dinner party or whatever it was, that the kids would be playing around, be at the kids' table, and the parents would be at their table. Now, at a Christmas party or whatever it is, the kids are all glued to their phones. They're not even talking amongst each other. And it's crazy to think what effect that is having, because ultimately the generation that's kind of been through that experience where they had iPads by the age they were 3 is kind of just now starting to become adult. So it'll be so interesting to see where they end up. Like, what do you think, Andre? What do you think are the repercussions of kind of not letting kids take risks and explore the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And I just, always think now when I come back to my hometown and look at the playgrounds around my house where I used to play and my friends used to play all day, they're empty right now.
I know.
Yeah. It's a big shame. And I think, certainly it has some sort of consequences on children's social skills, especially at a young age. I think, through us playing different games and even deciding what game to play, there was a lot of space to develop certain skills at a young age. And so I think that's one of the consequences. Secondly, it's also, I believe, a general common sense that one can get at an early age when you are just out there working with people, exploring, trying to figure something out. I remember we were, gathering wood and any usable trash we would find around neighborhood to build bunkers in the forest, and then we were pretending that we would be playing, like a strategic war games. And so I think even these things that were just meant to be fun actually gave us space to learn a lot of skills together, which I think then, as I mentioned at the beginning, translates to the children's independence as well. Being able to navigate the world and unexpected situations. when you are learning that from a tablet, it's just a simulation. But when you are playing out there with kids in the neighborhood, I think that's a gist of a real life.
Andrej, from what I'm hearing, you're an explorer. So I believe you seek adventure and you go out, you're curious, and you try to see what's out there for you. And I know you got the experiences to back it up because you're part of the World Economic Forum as global shaper, and you're not doing it in Canada per se, but more so you're focused on Asia. And I know you've been to Bangkok and Bali. Can you walk through your experiences with that?
So Global Shapers Community, as you mentioned, is a youth initiative founded by the World Economic Forum to bring young people who want to do something more in their communities together and sort of give them a platform to create a local impact on their communities while also being connected to the global community. And so I actually initially joined in Slovakia during high school. And then after moving to Canada, I had an opportunity to move to the Vancouver hub, as Global Shapers has hubs all across the world. And so even sort of the experience from these two hubs where we were making the impact locally gave me a much higher perspective and made me also recognize the international aspect and the international potential of this community. And so now during my exchange in Singapore, I had a chance to travel to Bangkok for a regional conference, which brought together, I believe, more than 180 shapers from across Asia Pacific. And it was just very empowering and formative experience to, not only meet these ambitious and amazing people and learn about the impact that they do, but also really think deeply about the issues that the Asia Pacific is facing and discussing, the potential solutions with the different stakeholders from the government, academia, nonprofit sector, entrepreneurship as well. And so for me as a sort of guest in this region, this was very eye-opening experience that I'm very grateful about. And as you mentioned, that also showed me the international power that the community can have and motivated me to be more involved on a global scale as well.
And what do you think is about you that pulls you towards that? Because, being from Slovakia, you're closer to Asia than, let's say, North America, but you're still quite foreign. It's definitely a different culture. So what pulls you towards solving problems in Asia specifically?
I think it might tie to even Slovakia's history and Slovakia's location. Historically, Slovakia has been right below the Iron Curtain or right to the east of it. And so I always sort of recognize that, even given our location and history of politics and political systems, we really are at the intersection of the East and the West, which made me curious about the both. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to study in North America, getting to know the culture, people, and business practices, the way of life, which is certainly something that is shaping the life in Slovakia right now and has been shaping it since very significantly since we switched to democracy 30 years ago. But then there is also that other half of the world which I believe we can learn a lot from. And so that always gave me that curiosity to look at the both sides and not only one of them, which we are influenced by the most these days.
Then I see so many similarities with me as well, Andrej, because I think I was fostered in an environment when I was able to take risks. Then I was also naturally curious, and I think that ultimately gave me the sense of going somewhere else than from home. And so that's why I decided to go from Montreal to Vancouver. But obviously, from Slovakia to Vancouver, it's a bit of a longer trip. So what made you want to take that risk or that challenge?
I had a chance to attend a few international exchanges during elementary school, which are funded by the European Union. And I was very lucky to go to the school that has these just short weekly exchange programs between different countries. And so during elementary school, I had a chance to spend 1 week in France 2 times, and then 1 week in Norway, up in the Arctics, watching the Northern Lights, which was amazing.
Nice.
And then also in Czech Republic. And so I got the gist of education abroad. And I thought that, it's not only the education itself, but the whole experience and the people you meet and the way you challenge yourself. And I wanted to experience that at a much larger scale, which eventually made me apply to universities only abroad. I didn't apply to any Slovak university, and that was sort of my goal to move abroad and get that experience. And I'm very glad that it worked out.
Interesting. So
I wanted to come back to our previous point. You mentioned you have a Polish background, but I assume you grew up in Canada, and so I'm wondering how's that experience been for you? Growing up in one country, but then having a connection with other part of the world. How does that sort of shape your experience and I guess mindset about exploring?
Yeah, it's been definitely interesting. I think more so from the perspective that just I was able to travel through my parents. I've had the chance that a lot of my family from Poland lives in Montreal, and so I had that opportunity, kind of feeling that sense of community from there. And I've traveled to Poland twice, and I think Poland is a lot more westernized, and so I don't think in terms of culture there's that much of a difference. Definitely in terms of Christmas, there's some traditions that we do that are different, and I think that's always cool to experience those small different things. But I think it's mainly the aspect of just being able to travel around. Still haven't been to Asia, still haven't been to South America, but pretty much been in and around. And that's what I kind of wanted to throw back at you as well. It's, why do you think traveling is so important? Because it often gets thrown around, oh, I want to travel the world, I want to go backpacking. But it seems that there's something a bit deeper and a bit more thoughtful when you do it. And so I wonder what that is. Why would you, I'm assuming you're the type of person who would recommend for people to travel. So if you were to pitch us traveling and why it's important, how would you say that? How would you say it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I think there have been certainly travel trips that didn't have much deeper meaning than just need to get out of this place for a while. But I think that's important sometimes as well as, part of some sort of psychohygiene. But, now that I had an opportunity to go to exchange in Southeast Asia, I really recognized the other aspects of traveling that I might, or the value of traveling that I might have not seen before. I think before, when I traveled around Europe and a little bit of Canada, the main sort of value that I always seen was, having new experiences, exploring different places and meeting new people. But I sort of didn't question like a deeper meaning behind that. But what I discovered in the past months, in which I traveled to more than, by now I think 10 countries around Southeast Asia and East Asia as well, is I think traveling has also a really strong potential to, create a space for us to have those deeper questions and more critical self-reflections about really finding out who we are, and what's important to us and who do we want to become. And, one very specific example of that for me and the approach to my life has probably been increasing my comfort with the uncertainty. Before this exchange, it was my last summer before graduation, and I was getting a bit more stressed about figuring out what's next because I didn't have it figured out, and I still don't have that figured out. But throughout this time, I really became comfortable with that and just became more confident in not knowing what's coming. And I think the way I sort of learned to be comfortable with this was through traveling and going to countries that I didn't know anyone and didn't know the language, didn't do a lot of planning. I just came there. One of them, for example, being, Vietnam, which can be very chaotic and certainly very uncertain, and you never know what's gonna happen and what to expect. But despite that, I managed to have a great trip and have a beautiful memories and experiences with people actually from one of them from UBC, but also then some people that I met in Vietnam. And so, learning that skill of navigating something unknown and uncertain certainly gave me more confidence and I guess comfort in terms of my career as well. And so I think it's important while traveling to also find time for a certain reflections, and it's always nice to do that with people because many of us are going through very similar experiences, and there is a lot we can learn about ourselves from each other as well.
From my experiences with traveling, I find that you learn a lot about like humanity. You learn about people in general. And although you mentioned, hey, it may be like uncertain going to a different country, sure, they may have like different cultures, they may celebrate different things, speak different languages. But at the end of the day, like beyond maybe like the political tensions of the East and the West, what do you see in the people on the other side of the world in Asia that you find that maybe like before you went, you may have had a connotation attached to them, thinking that, oh, the people here are going to be like this, they're going to act like this. Have you found any culture shocks or like anything where it made you flip the switch in your mind and you're like, oh, we're not so different after all. Like I can travel here, and like although it's spontaneous, like I do feel like I can get around.
I think one of the misconceptions, and you can call it probably prejudices as well, was that people in this part of the world are generally quite shy. And so I was expecting it to be quite difficult to get closer to people in here. And I was very mistaken. I think people, generally speaking, of course, in most of the places I visited, are very warm. And one specific thing that I really appreciate, especially as a tourist in many of those places, I saw a lot of pride in people's eyes, pride about their own country. And, many of them really wanted to present their country in the best way possible. And I didn't have a feeling that they do it to earn money from me as a foreigner, which, I certainly traveled in other parts of the world where you can really easily fall into multiple tourist traps. And even when people are nice, there is a very strong sort of financial incentive behind that. But it's something that I haven't seen much of here in Asia. And so I think that's something that made me feel very welcome and feel like home in here. And even though there has sort of been a lot going on in the past couple of weeks and months, the people here and the atmosphere that can create was really welcoming and gave me that space to focus on what's important.
Yeah, I really kind of feel what you mean, because I was remembered or asking this question, what does it mean to be Canadian? And I had the chance to go to Polish school every Saturday for 3 hours. And even though I've only been to Poland twice, I feel a bigger sense of nationalism and proud about being Polish than I am being Canadian, which is so interesting the way we were brought up. And yeah, you kind of echo that. And it's interesting how here we seem to be in this mindset of constantly dissing what we have and saying, oh, this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough. And I don't know if maybe there's links to that in consumerism, right? Where we're capitalistic and we're always trying to get the better thing. And that translates into nationalism and kind of the pride we feel, as opposed to maybe people in Asia feel more content with what they have. Hence, that translates into the pride they have for their country. Do you see kind of that similarity, or?
Yeah, I think first thing also to recognize, I think Asia is quite capitalistic as well, and there is a huge consumption culture that I actually didn't expect before coming here. I always thought US and maybe Canada are the country of shopping, are the countries of shopping malls. Asian countries are the countries of shopping malls. There's shopping malls literally everywhere. And it's something that I haven't expect. But, sort of to answer your question directly, I think people are really grateful for what they have. And I'm also wondering how the emphasis on family and the importance of family plays a role in that, because that's something I really noticed in here, the importance of family. And, even, for example, young people, when they're at university or after they graduate, before they move in with a partner, they would typically live with their parents until, much older age than we might be used to from Europe or North America. And so I think that family component is also something that brings people and communities together, which I think naturally makes them sort of realize and appreciate what they have. Also have to say, I think the warmest people were in the least developed countries that I traveled. Again, generalized, but that was sort of based on my experience, which really made me question, what type of things I appreciate, what type of things I take for granted, and what type of things are the ones that actually matter.
Although I have roots in Asia, I haven't been to as many countries as you have in that area. And you mentioned family helping people become more grateful for what they have and contributing to the warmth of the community. What exactly about family do you think it is that contributes to the general kindness of people?
It might be just the general goal of wanting to have a harmony within your family, which I think with that mindset, it also makes you translate to having a harmony with other people outside of your family, whether it's people in your community or the people who come and visit your country. And so I think that's something that in this part of the world translates beyond the family. And then people are generally very welcoming and friendly, and they want to treat you as a family. And one example of that, I went to Indonesia, East Java with my friends, and we did sort of a lot of driving around. So we had our personal driver who organized the trip for us, communicated on our behalf since none of us spoke the language. And we, right the first day, he was like, "Oh, next time you come, when you have more time, you should come to my hometown. You can stay with my family in our house. We'll take care of you, and we'll make sure that you have the, everything you need to have the best time in Indonesia, because this is a beautiful country." And to me, I felt like, I could be part of their family for some time. And so I think that importance really showed on how they can be welcoming towards people from other places as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know about you, I've never had an Uber driver tell me that one in Canada. So yeah, it's funny to see the difference in culture there. Kind of going back on what we touched upon before, it was kind of cool to see how the different things you've learned along traveling. And I think something you became comfortable with is risk. And I was reading this book called Polycrisis by Michael Esther. And he just talks about this idea that we've completely turned around from risk and we live just in this comfortable lives. We don't try to go out of our comfort zone at all anymore. And he was just talking about the example of weather. Before we used to, and this was just only a couple of hundred years ago, we used to feel cold weather, storms all the time. And it was normal. That's what it was. Now, the only time we actually experience weather is from the 5-minute walk we need to take from our building or our office to the bus loop. And that's the only time we experience weather. So just this idea of we're so comfortable with our current lives. And I think, Andre, you portrayed that example of stepping out of your comfort zone. And to that, I kind of want to ask you, how do students take more risk?
I think it starts with sort of questioning first of what's happening around them. I think, and something we discussed before we started this conversation was when I started at university, I had this perfect ideal scenario or path that I would pursue throughout and after university, which as a finance student was obviously, as it is for many people, I'll become a banker and I will make it to Wall Street, which was a mindset I came to university with as a finance student. And obviously, to getting such career, it would probably require taking a lot of risks and making a lot of sacrifices to get to such career. But I think the risk I took was to actually question that path and question whether it's right for me. And so I think the first step in order to even create an environment where one can take risk is to really ask ourselves, who am I without the world telling me who I should be? And who do I want to become without the world telling me who I should become? And, it's especially, I think, in these times of social media and a lot of available information, it's very easy to see very successful people who have pursued certain path. And, with certain careers, there is obviously many people who followed very similar path. And I think it's very easy, or it has been very easy for me as a student to sort of identify myself with that, oh, this sounds like a nice career, a nice life. I should just follow that. It's proven, it works. But I think the first step of taking this risk is actually questioning that, as I mentioned.
How would you go about doing that? Because, the initial thought that I get is, okay, well, how do I even start to figure out what is influencing me and not? I mean, the amount of solder students I just see that are, want to go into banking, and you kind of ask them why, and they're like, oh, well, because it brings a lot of money. And it's like, okay, well, why do you want money? And people just don't kind of ask the second thoughts. So how would you go about starting to figure out what influences you and kind of the societal pressures that are working against you and what you want?
So I think there is multiple ways of doing it. I was very lucky to have met people and developed very close relationships with people who were actually asking me those questions and who were really challenging me early enough, I think sometime in the junior year of high school, to really think deeply about who I am and what I do, and sort of have that intention, right? I think it's really about like figuring out what our intention is, not only in the activities we pursue, but in our daily conversations as well. What intention do you wake up with every day? And sometimes there has been part of my life when it's earning a lot of money, but then one of my friends introduced me to Chinese tea rituals. And whenever we would drink tea together, we would always have a very deep conversation focused on exactly these type of questions. And so for me personally, that was and that is until today, my platform to think about what's sort of going on in my life and how does, Andrej as a person sort of relate to that? And is there even a connection with the things I'm doing? Or is there some sort of superficial reasons such as, external rewards and, reputation I want to build and recognition I want to get and money I want to earn, taking the majority of the weight in guiding my decisions. And so, that has been my platform, and really grateful for the people that have helped me to ask those questions. And eventually it's something that then I learned to do by myself. But obviously there is many resources. I believe that even podcasts like you guys are doing, it's certainly something that young people can take advantage of and sort of to challenge their assumptions and way of thinking. Reading many books as you are based on your references.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that sort of comes to your mind or that you practice in terms of?
Yeah, I think journaling is the biggest thing, just kind of. And the second thing is also just allowing myself to be bored sometimes. I know sometimes when I get this feeling bored, I start scrolling. I'm like, okay, no, let me just take 15 minutes to do nothing. And I think that's helped me to just kind of ponder and sit with my thoughts. So yeah, that's kind of things I do to try and be as self-aware as possible. And then kind of exactly that, just trying to sit with people that are going to ask me those types of questions. And I remembered something recently was I was with my boss, and a question, something I always said is I want to go into entrepreneurship. It's my calling. And he just simply asked me, "Oh, why do you want to go into entrepreneurship?" And it was so funny because I always ask people, why do they want to do this or why do they want to do that? But I never asked that to myself. So I think that's super important. Just hanging out with people that are going to question you. And yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest one. Just hang out with people that are going to question you. And then journaling as well has helped me.
That sounds great. And, I tried journaling as well. Didn't work for me, but really surrounding yourself with people who can challenge you every day. I think it's really important.
I think it goes back to the never-ending battle with the ego and attention. Like, I'll be completely honest. Yesterday, we had a weekly team meeting, and one of my team members brought up to my attention that there was people in Soldered that were criticizing the podcast and saying, "Oh, well, I could do the same thing, but I'm not going to do the same thing because I could do it better than you, but I'm not going to do it because I don't want to. But if I did do it, I'd be better than you anyway." And, there was just this rumor, and I find it fascinating. Especially in business school where people are kind of just fighting for the titles and the big money positions. It's fascinating to see this battle of ego and attention. I'm sure you've dealt with that here and there and kind of questioned that.
Yeah, but I think what it also showed me is, and especially in a smaller city like Vancouver, I think maybe the most important things in the business school is the relationship and the reputation you build with people, because even, working on one project with certain group shows you a lot about different personalities. And, there has been certainly times when I was impressed with many people. And then, after that, they asked me, "Oh, I saw that you work at this company. Would you be comfortable introducing me to someone?" And I was very confident based on my experience in doing that. And so eventually, many of us will be probably potential colleagues, business partners, customers, suppliers. And I think, that's why learning how to let that ego go away, which might be very difficult, and it's something all of us are probably learning and fighting with every day to a certain extent. I think it's really important. And from my experience, actually, it's sort of quite collaborative culture that I'm very happy about, and it's something that I quite often sort of say and promote when people ask me about my experience. And so that has definitely been one of my highlights. But one more point back to your sort of question about the risk. I also started, asking myself, what is the actual risk that I'm taking and what stakes are in the game? Because, I don't have any commitments. There is not, a family, children, and a spouse that I need to be financially taking care of and bringing up. And so really what stakes are there, and what is the actual consequences of the risk we are taking? And I came to realize that as of now in my life, they're actually quite low. But the return in many of these opportunities to take risks and step out of our comfort zone, especially at this time of our age when we are really young and many things we are experiencing for the first time, I think is really, really high. And so that's also something that just helped me put things into perspectives. There is not much I feel like I can personally.
Yeah, and I think it's been the same for this podcast. It's like something we've always talked about. It's just this idea of, well, if we do fail, the thing we lost ultimately is just our time. But, we still have our entire lives ahead of us. So we have that to our advantage. So maybe, okay, we're going to make some enemies along the way that are going to be jealous of us and whatnot. But ultimately, again, the risk is pretty much low and the gain is so high.
I would even question that the fact that you lost your time. Like, I feel like, and I would have hope, and based on what I've seen, you guys had some amazing conversation and met some amazing people. And I hope you were able to get a lot of value from that as well. And I think, I'm very glad to hear that perspective, because it's something I think we share. And I always try to encourage young people to actually take those risks and try out new things and fail. Yeah. Even though the failure with these low stakes is actually pretty insignificant, because there is not much on the line.
Yeah. For risk-wise, growing up, I guess, I think a lot of people can relate to what I'm going to say. It's that when we see the world, when we see the potential risks out there, we feel like, oh, it's it's pretty big, and it's all in our heads. Like the only people who are making it worse, making it sound worse, are our own selves. And over the past week, I joined a program called Launch Week, and through that, I met a lot of people working on their own projects, trying to put something out in the world within the span of 1 week. And it sounded daunting to me at first, but over the course of the program, I ultimately started this group chat with, now it's like around 40 people who are helping to keep each other accountable for the daily goals that they set. And it's pretty cool to see how much you can accomplish when you ignore the thought in the back of your head that says, oh, it's going to be challenging, you're going to be criticized, this is going to be tough. When you fail, you're going to look back and you're going to regret what you do. And yeah, over the past week, I just learned incredibly that it doesn't really matter what people are going to think of you, because people probably aren't going to spend a big chunk of their day criticizing you in their heads anyways. So why not just go for it? And yeah, I think that's the mentality I'm taking on.
That's what I always thought about as well. It's just when you look at somebody and they're trying something new, do you care? No, you absolutely don't care. So why would they care when you try something new? I've always seen the world that way as well.
And it's great that you have that experience. And I think, these type of programs are really important. And that's how you build your wisdom. Like that's how, by taking these risks, you build life experience, which is actually the one that is probably going to be more helpful in your career and the decision we take in our career than, what we do in our school projects. Because in life, we really learn how to make difficult decisions. And so by exposing ourselves to different types of experiences, I think we can really build that sort of wisdom and the life experience that can be also really applicable to school and the future career as well.
Yeah, it just builds that confidence that once you take that risk and you're able to do it and you see, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. Even if you maybe failed or it didn't work out, whatever, like, okay, well, nothing bad happened to me. And then you continuously build that over the years. I think that's the second thing that differentiates people that, you look up to and you say, wow, they've achieved so much. I think they're typically people that have just built this concept of, I've heard it, it's called your self story, in the sense where you're building your own story by just making these small marginal confidence boosts throughout your day, whether it's, going to the gym or, doing something you didn't think was possible. And I heard Jordan Peterson actually talk about it recently. It's when he was doing his clinical practice, a lot of what he would do was just figure out what the next step that his clients could take. And, he obviously interviewed people that were, super depressed, that couldn't even get up of bed. So, and the only thing he was trying to do was just figure out, okay, what's that one step that the client can take that's possible? Maybe it's just getting out of bed. Maybe it's, putting on their clothes for the day, whatever it is. So yeah, it's finding those small steps in your life that you can take and just slowly building your self story.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what we also need to realize is how the world is sort of shifting and what us as humans bring to the world and how we create value. And if you look at the history, historically, before the first industrial revolution, we were mostly taking advantage of the potential of our body. And we're doing manual work and really, agriculture producing. Then the first industrial revolution came and we started using the potential of our brain. We started developing machines that can actually do the manual work for us. And I think now we are at a very interesting intersection with the development of AI that, as research shows, can actually, in a relatively short span of time, replace many tasks that knowledge workers, which would be us and the people with university education are doing. And so the question I've been trying to ask myself is, okay, what's next? If it's not our thinking and the use of business frameworks we learned at Sauder, how we create value, what is it? Like, how do we create that value? And I think that's where we sort of move up on the hierarchy of first coming from the body to the brain. I think now we move more towards the heart and the spirit. How do we make relationships with the people that we work with? What energy do we bring to the team? do we bring stability, and how do we sort of support each other and really, pursue something that is meaningful for us. And so I think taking those risks and exposing myself to these different type of experiences has also been intentional to develop these sort of aspects of myself.
Now, even in 271, we've had the chance to have some guest speakers on. And even though they have super high positions in banking, we realize at the end of every conversation, they're all salespeople. It's all about the relationships and how they maintain them, even though they have super high technical banking positions. At the end of the day, it really comes down to the clients they have and do the clients trust them or not, which I know for me was a bit of an eye-opener this year for sure. And just seeing the importance of relationship. And I think, as you say, Andre, I think we're just going to be moving into that more and more. I think that's why podcast industry, ironically, is growing. It's because people are lacking human connection, real human connection more and more. I think podcasting is just this medium where people can connect or listen into a conversation. And I think they're missing that I don't think podcasting exists, a couple of years ago, because there would be, why would I listen to a conversation? I'm having conversations 60 hours a day, but it's definitely not the case nowadays. So
I think so. I think, there is certainly an educational and the informational element of that as well. But I think certainly there is a lot of space for not only developing those relationship with other people, but also with ourselves and within ourselves. And even if you think about it, most of our education and the types of experiences we have is focused on exploring the external world. But as we discussed before, in all of that hustle and the grind and the chaos that is going on with that, we find little time to sort of explore what's going on internally, which I think is, at least equally, if not more important than what's going on in the external world.
Andre, you sound like you do a lot of introspection and you know yourself pretty well. I understand it's...
I'm trying to. That's the perception. I'm glad, but I think it's always... I don't think there is a one answer to that. This is who I am.
Right.
And maybe even accepting that is actually quite important. I think we are, evolving every day. We have conversations like these and many others that always bring up something new. And so that's why I've been also sort of, putting my hands away from really defining myself. And sometimes it makes, answering certain interview questions, especially, much more difficult. But yeah, that's sort of, what I find quite important to be really contemplating a lot.
You sound like you're the person who is trying to explore, who is trying to figure out themselves a little more than what most of us are doing. And I understand you're going back to Slovakia for winter break, and after that you're coming back here, finishing up your last term in university. What direction do you want to head in the future? Do you think you got that part figured out? Like, where do you want to be maybe 3 years or 5 years from now?
I think, when I think about the things I do, there is a two sort of modes that I'm always thinking about. It's or the trade-off I'm making. It's exploration versus exploitation. Exploration, am I trying out new things and sort of prototyping and testing out different types of paths and options to figure out what's the best, versus the exploitation. This is one thing that I believe is, the right for me and that I should focus on. I don't think I'm there yet to exploit something very, sort of with 100% steam power. So I think it's going to be sort of a balance of both. And I still want to, especially after this experience in Asia, I traveled to quite a few places, but spent sort of limited time in there. And so I would like to find a work opportunity in Asia, if possible, after graduation, to really understand the culture and the region sort of even more, and have that, European, North American and Asian perspective as well. And, there is certainly a part of me that wants to start new things and build new things, which is something we might have in common. And, you guys doing this podcast is a clear demonstration of that. And so, ideally in the long term, I would like to start something on my own with people I enjoy working with. But if that's not the case for now, definitely finding an organization, place, and people where I have a space to build something within existing infrastructure and systems. I think that's something that would be very exciting for me. And as you might, hear from this answer, it's not very specific. I don't have a specific thing figured out. And it was stressing me out a few months ago. I think I'm okay with that right now. And I'm still trying to, enjoy the last few days in Asia, enjoy my time in Slovakia, and then come back to Canada to sort of, really think more deeply about that. But be open to, opportunities that come along the way as well.
That sounds good. Sounds like you're keeping everything open.
How about you guys in terms of this podcast? What sort of next for you? What are your goals? Where do you want to take it? You mentioned that you've been testing out and implementing some changes. So I'm also curious about what's next for you guys.
Yeah, I think I've been kind of stressing out about it recently just because I've been realizing how many players are in the industry and, the levels that it's going to take us to reach that next step. But I think that's exactly perhaps the thing that will make us reach that next step. It's obsessing over these small things and nitty gritty, and the titles are right. The word that we're using is not right. The camera should be improved. The lighting needs to be improved. Kind of just obsessing about all these small things. Even, Brian and I talked for like at least an hour after episodes end, just thinking about what can we like marginally do to improve better. And then the plan is kind of just to take this and help as many people as we want. The reason why we want to have a big reach is to help as many people as we possibly can. We always thought at the beginning, if just one more person listens to this and reaps benefit, that's better than nothing, right? And that was the inspiration behind starting the podcast. But at the same time, we do kind of want to have the biggest impact as we can, and that's why we're trying to have the biggest reach that we can. And yeah, the pursuit of that journey is fun. I was even thinking about it, if we do succeed and it ends up being like a media company and we're standing in New York and, looking over Central Park, it's all that part that's fun. It's everything that happened before to get us to that exact moment. And so, yeah, that's something that I journaled about yesterday, actually, just kind of slowing down and appreciating the process, even though I've been so obsessed and kind of stressing about like, shit, we need to do all of these things to improve. But yeah, kind of just relaxing and enjoying the process as well along the way. How about you?
I think a big focus for us is impact. And impact can come in a lot of different forms. One of the main forms I believe we're pursuing is impact through conversations. So not typical, the impact not solely from the advice of our speakers, but how can we get the speaker to open up? How can we show that what they've achieved is also achievable for us? Like, we want to show that our speakers are human, they're vulnerable as well, they don't have everything figured out, and they're always exploring on the pursuit of whatever they may be interested in. And I think if we can get our listeners to understand that we aren't so different after all, it's that impact that we're really seeking. And Andrej, the final question we're going to ask is to get your thoughts on a quote left to us by our previous guest. And the previous guest is an executive producer for one of the world's largest podcasts out there with huge number of listeners. And the quote goes, "Vision for the many, detail for the few." What are your thoughts on that?
It's a very powerful quote, which also reminds me of, when I think of impact, I have a global perspective and I have this sort of cause or something that is very deeply driving the change I want to strive for. But I think it's very important to start making that impact locally and, using that as a platform for greater change. And I think, to me, what it sort of means even more personally is really starting with yourself. And that comes, generally with making an impact and leadership itself. Being able to lead yourself, I think, is a very important element and critical element in your ability to lead others. And so I think starting with yourself, giving the love to yourself, giving to your family and the closest people around you, I think it's a very important foundation of spreading it sort of further and make it an impact much larger to connect it to that grand vision that one might have. And I think, back to our conversation previously, the Global Shapers community, I think, is a good example of that, because the main point is to create really local impact that is detailed to the specific issues that the city where the Global Shapers hub is, but then, contextualize that within bigger impact areas that we care about globally as a global community. And so that's what the quote means to me. Very, very nice one.
Thanks so much, Andrej.